everyone. I'm Jessica Rhodes. I'm the founder of a podcast booking agency called Interview Connections. We were the first podcast booking agency in the world back in 2013 when there were only like 200,000 podcasts in the world, and now there's over 3 million. So we've been booking entrepreneurs as guests on podcasts for 11 years now, and I've come to know a thing or two about how to use podcast appearances really effectively in your business. From a personal introduction, I'm a mom. I'm married. I've got two kids who are 9 and 11. So if anyone's got school age kids, I'm in the midst of absolute insanity of competitive sports here, there, and everywhere. I've got 10 chickens in the backyard, so that's fun. And that's my brief intro.
That's awesome. And, I know everybody else in the world, they always kind of like introduce their guest speaker. I always find it's way better because you just did a way better job than I could ever do. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for starting us off with that introduction so we could get to know you a little bit better in the backgrounds. We're basically at that 5-minute mark. I'll let you go ahead and kick off. So everybody, the topic today that we have sent out to you guys is how to attract dream clients with podcast appearances. And as you can tell, Jessica is absolutely the expert on that matter. So, Jessica, I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. All right. So we're going to be, talking about podcast appearances today. I think there is a chat here. So if you can just let me know in the chat, have you ever been interviewed on a podcast before? Just maybe put in the chat a sense of what level of knowledge you're coming into this meeting about with podcast appearances. That would be awesome. So like I said, we were the first podcast booking agency to market back in 2013. At that time, podcasting was really in its infancy. It had only been around for maybe 5 years or so at this point. But in 2013, business owners were just starting to utilize it. There was still, internet radio. Was anyone in business in 2013? Do you guys remember Blog Talk Radio? There were telesummits on like instant teleseminar where you just dialed in. Like it was nothing like it was today. But at that time, business owners were seeing that there was this nice opportunity to own their own media by having a podcast and then leveraging these interview opportunities to get visibility to target markets. And so how I got into this was that I was a new mom at the time. So I have a 9 and 11-year-old. And when I was pregnant with my 11-year-old, I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And I talked to my parents because my dad's an entrepreneur. He has a newsletter marketing company, had a newsletter marketing company. He's retiring this year, and he's a business coach. And he brought me on as a virtual assistant to show me how I could work from home as a VA. And he had had his podcast already, and he had been interviewing on podcasts as a guest to get coaching clients. Because when he got interviewed on a podcast, the host would often want to become a client. Listeners would hear him and reach out and become a client. So he said, Jess, why don't you book me as a guest on podcasts? Because I have a background in door-to-door canvassing. I was working for a nonprofit doing door-to-door fundraising and organizing. So I just took all of that experience knocking doors and I just started emailing podcast hosts and pitching my dad as a guest. That led to starting Interview Connections and creating an agency and really setting up a new model, because we couldn't have the same type of model that like a talent agency has, because there's no money being exchanged between the host and the guest. So there's no cut that I could take. And then we didn't want to have the PR model where it was just a retainer where you get what you get. I wanted to deliver guaranteed bookings, so there was real certainty in what you would get from working with us. So that's how I came to start Interview Connections. And then just check the chat here. So you've been interviewed once or twice. I have a friend and coach both with podcasts, and they want me to start one a long while ago. Okay, cool. And so when I started Interview Connections, my clients were the podcast hosts, because a lot more people were hosting a show and starting a podcast than necessarily being a guest. And it flipped to now where all of our clients are the guest expert. because it's number one, it is a lot easier to be a guest than to start your own podcast. When you have your own podcast, have the expense and the responsibility of putting out regular episodes, producing it, editing it, growing an audience. When you're a guest, you can just show up, be interviewed, provide value, and then go on with your day without having to edit the whole episode. There's different benefits to both. But even if you do want to start your own show, I always recommend being a guest first, because you really hone your message. You get clear on what is the unique type of show that you want to bring out into the market that's not already out there. And then you can grow an audience of people that already listen to podcasts. So when you go get interviewed on many podcasts every month, you're growing your email list, your followers of people that listen to podcasts. So then even when you want to start one, you've already got people that are like, oh yeah, I liked hearing him or her, and I'm going to go listen to their podcasts. So that's just a little bit of my 2 cents on starting a podcast. So, you guys have said, you've been on a couple podcasts, have kind of thought about it, maybe starting a podcast. I want to first go over some of the main benefits of podcast guesting, because the obvious one is, oh, I'm going to go be in front of an audience. There's that visibility, but there's actually so many benefits of being a podcast guest, like obviously attracting dream clients, but there's many different ways to leverage this strategy in order to achieve the result that we all want, which is more dream clients. So number one, brand awareness. So does anyone here feel like the best kept secret? Like, you know your stuff, you have a great agency, you deliver great results, but you don't really have a big following. People don't, like, other than your clients and maybe some referrals, you don't have this big audience of people that really know about your company. So let me know if you feel like the best kept secret. That's oftentimes what our clients share, is that they just feel like the best kept secret. They're not this big celebrity influencer, but they've got a really great business. So it just gets you brand awareness. It gets you visibility for the expertise that you have. It also gives you thought leadership and authority. So especially when you have an agency, and I relate, I have an agency, we book podcast interviews, you can get caught in the trap of price comparison. Leads come to you and they're like, well, how are you different from XYZ agency? Okay, I talked to these other 3 agencies. What makes you different? And you're like, well, the price might be a little bit different. Maybe the commitment is a little bit different. You offer the same services and everyone's saying we're the best. Like, at the end of the day, sometimes leads are just comparing you to other agencies that on the face of things, everyone's kind of offering a very similar service. And when you, as the agency founder, CEO, are out there being interviewed as a guest expert and providing value, your thought leadership and your authority in the topic is what makes you look different. That is what sets you apart. And your story is what sets you apart. When you're interviewed on podcasts, you're educating and you're providing value, and you're sharing your story. So people will, leads will choose to work with your agency compared to other agencies when they align with your story and they align with your values. You never know what about your story someone's going to latch onto, and they're like, oh, I relate to them. Like, oh, I've got 2 kids too. Oh, I've got chickens too. Like, oh, like I live in Rhode Island too. Like, whatever that commonality is, there could be 5 agencies that all kind of offer the same service, but when the founder's out there sharing their story, leads will choose to work with the agency that they have more of an emotional connection with. And buyers buy when they feel that emotional connection, and they become loyal clients, loyal long-term clients, when they feel that emotional connection. So when you can be out on podcast sharing your story, it is quite literally the only thing that will truly set you apart from your competition. And in the world of agencies, there's a lot of other agencies. There's a lot of people that are offering the same type of services. So we have got to share our story if we want to attract dream clients and stand apart from our competition and look different. Our client, Mike Maynard, I just want to give you a quick example of what this looks like. He has a marketing and PR firm, and he serves B2B tech enterprise level companies. So he's like high 7-figure agency. His contracts are in the 6 figures, very long sales cycle. So he gets interviewed on podcasts, not to generate lots of leads from the audience, because the pool of potential clients he has is small, B2B tech enterprise level businesses. But he gets on podcasts because it makes his agency look different. So when he's submitting a proposal to a potential client and that potential client is reviewing his agency and other agencies that can also do marketing and PR. When they see that Mike, the managing director of the firm, is also a guest expert on industry podcasts, that makes them look different. And it also gives the lead the opportunity to hear Mike. One of our other clients, David Lumley, talks about, he's like, if they hear my voice and they like it, oh, they want to work with me. If they hear it and they don't like it, they're not going to want to work with you. So it also kind of allows the lead to get to know you a little bit and say like, yes, I really trust this person. I understand that they're a leader, they're an authority. So that's just one example. It's also a great SEO strategy. So when you're interviewed on podcasts, you're getting a link back to your website on the episode description. So podcast hosts have their own website. And when they interview you, your episode is essentially a blog post on their website. And then they put a backlink to your site on the show notes. And so let's say you do 30, 40 interviews on podcasts over a year, that's 30 to 40 backlinks. Like that is going to drastically improve your search engine optimization. It's going to increase your domain authority. And it's just the best organic SEO strategy you can deploy because you get the backlink and then the actual visibility with the audience. And then you're attracting new clients. So when you're speaking on the podcast, and we're going to talk a little bit today about creating interview topics to be interviewed about. So we'll do a little workshopping there. When you're interviewed on podcasts, speaking to your target audience, your ideal clients, about topics that they are most interested in, that they want to learn about, you then give a call to action. So at the end of the podcast interview, the host will say, how can our listeners connect with you? If they're interested in working with you, where can they go to find you online? And that's your opportunity to extend an invitation for that audience to come connect with you, to book a consultation call, to book discovery session, whatever the case. And that's really the key in generating leads and attracting dream clients from the audience, is you tell the audience exactly where they can go to connect and to book that next step. And then in the green room chat, so that's the very end of the episode, the host says, where can our listeners connect with you? You give a call to action. We can talk a little bit about some examples of CTAs. Then the recording stops. Now you're in the green room, you're in the virtual backstage with that host. And what happens a lot, especially for our clients who are agency owners, the host of the show says, okay, that was awesome. Like, how do you guys work? What are your packages? What does it look like to work with you? Because I've been really unhappy with my agency, or I'm thinking it's time for me to actually find an agency and help me start running ads. I need a new website done. And they'll actually say, okay, I'm interested in working with you. And so then you're on this prospect call and you're like, oh, great. Okay, let's set up a call. Like, tell me a little bit more about what you're looking, what you're looking to do. So a lot of times the host of the show will actually become a client. We have a lot of agency clients who report that is how they're getting an ROI, is the host that interviews them says, okay, I'm actually really interested in working with you. So any questions so far on kind of the main benefits of podcast guesting? I see we've got some episodes in the chat, links to interviews people have done, which is awesome. So just let me know if you've got questions as we go. So again, podcast guesting is perfect for business owners who have really been behind the scenes. So let me know in the chat if you've kind of been behind the scenes, you've been delivering the service, you've been working with clients, and you're feeling like, I've got a lot of value to bring. I've got a lot of value to share, and I want to get out from behind the scenes. I want to build a personal brand. Let me know if you relate to that, because when you know that you have a great company and you have a great agency, you deliver an amazing service, your clients stay with you forever. So if you could just get more clients, it's the key to growth. Being a guest on podcasts is a great way to grow, because especially if you're a little bit nervous about stepping out of the spotlight, if that is you, what's comfortable is staying behind the scenes. What's comfortable is continuing to work with your clients, because maybe you run Facebook ads. You're comfortable running Facebook ads. You're comfortable working with your clients, and to step out and now be visible to people that aren't yet your client, it is scary. Who knows what you're going to invite in? It is a little bit nerve-wracking, but the way you reduce those nerves and the way you step into being more visible and step into being a thought leader and being an authority is to do it in a really safe way, which is through one-on-one conversations. Like one-on-one conversations where you don't need to have a whole keynote talk perfected and planned and you're on a stage and there's all these people right in front of you. Like just have a one-on-one conversation with somebody. And that's literally what a podcast interview is. It's a one-on-one conversation with a podcast host, and then they publish it for all their listeners to hear. But just focusing on the fact that it is a conversation, that you do provide the host with topics that they can ask you about. So it's not like an old school radio show where it's like a shock jock and they're going to ask you questions that you don't know the answer to. This is a conversation with a targeted audience. The host of the show is going to ask you questions, probably that you gave them ahead of time. And so what that is you're going to put together a podcast one sheet. So a podcast one sheet is a one-pager PDF that has your bio. So it has about a 250 word bio that the host could read as an introduction to the show. It has topics that the host can ask you about, and it has questions that the host could ask you in the interview. So the majority of the interviews that you do as a guest when you have a one sheet are the host asking you questions from your one sheet. And so that should really reduce any nerves that you might have, because once you know the answers to the questions on your one sheet, you just now go on the podcast and answer them and just practice. The more interviews you do, the more confident you'll get, the more you'll hone your message, and you'll really workshop the stories that land the best and that resonate the most with the host, because you get that instant feedback. And that's something that you don't get with any other type of content for the most part. When you create a video and you put it up, you're kind of waiting to see like what happens with views, but when you're on a podcast and you're being interviewed, you share a story, you immediately see how the host responds. You see if they go, oh, or yeah, like you get that instant feedback loop. So it allows you to hone your message in real time and really take things to the next level with your content. All right. So does anyone have a speaker sheet? Just out of curiosity, because we're going to talk a little bit about the podcast one sheet. I'd love to know if anyone here actually has some interview topics or has created a podcast one sheet before. Let me know. So the podcast one sheet okay, perfect. Dominique has one. So yeah, you might go through and maybe edit some of your topics, or just, affirm from this training, like you're on the right track. So I created the podcast one sheet in 2013 when I first started booking my dad as a guest on podcasts. I would reach out to podcast hosts and realize they all kind of asked the same questions. They were all asking, okay, I need his bio, I need his topic, I need his questions. And so I put all of that information on one page, and 11 years ago, that was just a Microsoft Word document. And now it's a beautifully designed one-page branded PDF. But the actual topics and the copy of the one sheet has stayed the same. And a lot of times people try to get fancy with it. They make a 2-page, they make all this stuff. But I'm telling you, podcast hosts all want a few basic things. They want your bio so they could read an introduction. They want topics they could interview you about, because when we pitch our clients to podcasts, we're going to say, here are some potential topics that would be a good fit. Like when Mike and I talked a few weeks ago, we're like, here are some of my topics. And he's like, I think that would be great. So you just want to give people a few topics that they could say, oh, this would really resonate with my audience. And then the questions are actually what feed the interview. The goal of the one sheet is to make the host job as easy as possible. Because when you make the host job easy, they love you, because you're saving them time, you're helping create a great episode, and you're setting yourself up for success, because you're going to be interviewed about topics that your target audience wants to hear you talk about. And so to think about what you want to have on your one sheet, the goal of your podcast interviews, if you want to be attracting dream clients, is to speak about the things that would increase the number of listeners that reach out and want to work with you. And so what do people need to hear you speak about in order to actually take the action to reach out and to book a call with you? So they need to understand, what problem do you solve? Like, what problem do you solve for your target market? Where could you help them go? What pain point could you take away from them? So that's huge. So what are all of the, as you think about what your topics are, just start listing out, like, what are all the problems that I solve? What do I do for my clients? What do I make possible? So tell me, I know we have all agency owners here. What services do you provide? If you could put it in the chat, I'd love to know, what services do you provide for your clients? Like, what types of agencies do we have here? I would love to get a sense of that so I can just kind of customize what we're saying here. Well, people are putting that in the chat. Okay, brand strategy and web development. Perfect. We'll start there. We got PPC, SEO, web. Okay, love it. So with brand strategy and web development, think about, like, why do they need their website developed? Like, what problem is that going to solve for them? What ultimately is the, like, explaining brand strategy? Like, that is a phrase that, people could interpret that in many different ways. So you want to think about who your dream clients are, who your target audience is, where are they at before they sign up with you, before they make the investment to work with you, what level of business? Because you could talk about PPC, content, SEO, web development for people just getting started in business, like they need their first website, all the way up to having a 7-figure, 8-figure business where they're really taking things to the next level and yeah, like really upgrading things. So you want to think about, I'm sorry guys, my daughter just asked me a question. As I said, that's yes. Okay. Sorry about that. So you want to think about who your dream clients are and what their pain points are and how you help them. And when you do a podcast, you turn your phone off and tell all of your family to not text you during that hour. So some of the questions that I have listed out here to just kind of help get your mind going to, like, what you could be interviewed about are, what are the biggest breakthroughs that you help your clients to achieve? So you can look at your dream clients that you work with, that you've worked with, and what are their testimonials? What are their success stories? Look at your case studies to see what are the actual results that you've helped them to achieve with the service that you provide. What are the deepest, and also from your perspective, because people buy emotionally, they choose an agency because of who they connect with. What are you passionate about? Like, as it relates, mostly as it connects to your business, but like, what are you passionate about? Who are you passionate about helping? I've seen agencies that, they specifically work with, women coaches that are out there having an impact, or they specifically work with, real estate investors, or, what are you most passionate about? Because maybe you just work with anyone and you just like love marketing and you love SEO and you just want to grow a really big business. Like, maybe you're really passionate about business and why, but really tap into what you're passionate about, because the most effective interviews are the ones that have chemistry and that have some spark to them. Because I'm telling you, if you're just like dry, just like explaining SEO, it's boring. You've got to add some of your passion into it, like tap into that, because if you're not passionate about what you're talking about, the listeners are going to tune out and they're not going to be motivated to reach out and book a call with you. So you want to think about how you can be educating the audience and answering questions and fueling your answers with stories that motivate the audience to say, like, oh, okay, that's for me. So when you're answering the questions, you give value, you give information, but you include stories to bring it to life. So you give an answer and then you say, we actually worked with a client who had this type of business. This is where they were at. This is what we did for them. This is where we helped them, get to. So stories are huge. Think about what your vision for your company is, what impact you want to have on the world with your message. What are your convictions? What are your beliefs about your industry, and what industry you're in that might be polarizing or have people stop and want to listen? So this is huge, being in the agency world, offering services that a lot of other agencies offer. Maybe speak about your industry. What are some common practices in your industry that maybe you have a different opinion on? And like topics and questions that will have you setting yourself apart from the rest and not making it up just for shock value, but like, what are your convictions? What are your beliefs? Maybe you operate things a little bit differently because you've seen the problems that people have had with other agencies. So having topics that set you up to really talk about what makes you different and what your beliefs are, what your values are, because people will align and want to work with companies where they're aligned with the values, they have that emotional connection, and they can see that you're the best. Like, you do a really good job. You have case studies, you have stories and examples, you share your track record of success. So all of those in an interview really attracts listeners to say, oh, wow, that was amazing, and I really want to work with you. So that's a little, those are some prompts to just kind of getting you thinking about, like, what could I be interviewed about? So let me know in the chat, what are your main areas of expertise? Like, what do you think your topics and questions can be? And Mike, I don't know if you want to do some live coaching. Like, if anyone wants to come off of mute and actually maybe we can workshop some topics and questions, I would be happy to do that.
Absolutely.
Cool. Does anyone want to like come up and just kind of talk through like
Yeah,
topics?
use the raise hand feature if you want to be live interviewed and see if we can pull some topics out that you could talk about. If you think that podcasting and podcast appearances would be of most value to you, would love for you to be at the forefront, right? Somebody that's going to take this information, run with it, use it.
Yeah.
You got any volunteers? Feel free to raise your hand.
Yeah, and what I'll also do as we're waiting for people to really step into the spotlight, I'm going to pull up some one-sheet examples from some of our clients that have agencies, and that way you can just kind of get those creative juices flowing. So I told you guys about Mike Maynard. So what I'll do is I'll tell you about his topics and questions. Let's see. So his first topic is why everyone should be doing account-based marketing. 4 steps to delivering killer B2B PR campaigns. So similar to email subject lines working really well with like a number and steps, like, ooh, like what are those 4 steps? So think about like how you could take something that you're an expert in and break it down into steps. Like on my one sheet, or one of the topics I'll say is like, what are the 3 pillars of podcast guesting? I've talked for over a decade about like podcast guesting success, but then I broke it down. I'm like, well, there's probably 3 main pillars that lead to results. There's the call to action, there's your relationship with the host, and there's repurposing the content. So what are the 3 pillars of podcast guesting success? So think about stuff that you talk about all the time and kind of drill it down into a topic that's, when a host reads it, they're like, ooh, like, I want to know what those pillars are. I want to know what those steps are. Building personas and understanding their distinct customer journey, why you shouldn't be waiting until the end of a project to run reports. That's a great topic for his target audience, because it's like, if they read that and they realize they're doing the opposite, they're going to want the explanation. So you want topics that spark some curiosity. Why AI is going to disappear in marketing. That's kind of like a little bit of a shock, because it's like, wait, I thought AI was very visible in marketing. So why is it going to disappear? And then 5 ways to increase your marketing ROI. Very enticing. We all want to increase our ROI. So think about like, what does everyone want? What does your target audience want? They all want more results. They all want their SEO to perform better. They all want more traffic. They want better content. So like 5 ways to do this, 4 steps to do this, 3 pillars. So those are some good practices of how to, structure your topics. Are these helpful, you guys? Are hearing some examples helpful? Feel free to just like fill in the blanks, take this basic structure of a topic and then you can kind of fill in yours. We got
a hand. Krista, go for it.
Oh, couldn't find my mute button. Sorry about that. Yes, I'm curious. So you were talking about how doing your own podcast was so much more work. What about collaborations? Instead of just being a guest, like having collaborations with other podcasters, is that something that you would also, I guess, be able to speak to?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the biggest things that we see is collaborating with podcast hosts is huge. So think about your interview on somebody's podcast is your first meeting with them. It's your first coffee date to kind of get to know each other and have a conversation. And then really that's the first step. And then what comes out of that is a collaboration. So some podcast hosts, you're gonna really hit it off. Like I was on a podcast a few weeks ago and there was just like an instant chemistry. Like me and this host, we just got along so well. She's got an agency and we're just like talking, and she really loved my topic. And I just personality wise, it was such a great match. And so there's people like that where you're like, you want to be an affiliate partner? Okay, let's like, great. We need to keep in touch. So collaborations are perfect. One of our clients who's an agency owner, his name is John McDonald. His company is called The Good. And one of the hosts of the show was organizing a conference at YouTube headquarters and booked him as one of the speakers. So a lot of times these podcast hosts, they're hosting a show and they're also doing other things. They're organizing events, they're booking speakers, like they're extroverts who have a show and they're doing other things. So they'll be interviewing people on their podcast and then saying, okay, this was a great interview. I also want to connect you with this person. I also think we should do this or do a joint, Instagram live or a live stream on YouTube. So collaborations are huge. I all for them. I think their podcast interviews are really just the first meeting. Awesome. So I can looks like the topic ideas were super helpful. So I'm going to give you a few more ideas. So our client, Joe Sullivan, has a marketing agency and consultancy in the manufacturing niche. So also think about what industry you specialize in. Like, does anyone specialize in a specific industry? Any specific industry. As I mentioned, Mike Maynard, our client, is B2B tech. Joe Sullivan is manufacturing. So he is going on very niche manufacturing podcasts, and any kind of like bigger company, B2B, that's solving really complex problems. So some of his topics and questions are leveraging your team's expertise in a changing B2B buying environment, the 7 core elements of an industrial marketing strategy. So really great opportunity to put in your specific industry. So if you have, okay, perfect. So attorneys, travel and tourism, aesthetic services. So you want to take a topic that you have and just customize it to your industry. So that way your market really feels like you are special for them, because everyone feels like Alex Hormozy says, like, oh, I'm a special snowflake. Like everyone feels like they're very special. And so you want to make sure your clients know, like, this is for you. Like this marketing topic, while it can relate to everyone, like this is actually just a topic for, attorneys or travel, tourism, things like that. Fast results versus sustainable success, creating the right marketing balance. Is it time to fire some customers? Focusing on your best prospects. All prospects aren't created equal. A tiered account-based marketing strategy. And then one of his questions are, because I know of a lot of people that do SEO here, how do you recommend creating a balance between activities that can produce quickly, PPC, direct marketing, and activities that build a sustainable foundation, content, SEO? So within that question, he is painting the picture that there's some things that create results really quickly and that there's other things that are for foundation and long term. And so answering that question, he's able to educate his audience on like managing expectations, which is huge in agencies, right? Like people come in, they're going to spend all this money on a retainer and ad spend, and how do they know when they're going to see an ROI? I know I do that all the time with podcast guesting. It's a long-term brand building strategy. You can see quick results, but it's often a long-term brand building strategy. And so you have to do the same thing, manage expectations. And so when somebody hears you on a podcast explaining that SEO and content is long term and PPC can lead to really quick results, they come into a sales call with you kind of having a base level understanding, and then you can take things to the next level. So that's another way to think about what topics would be good. What are your biggest obstacles in a sales call? What do you wish all of your prospects understood? Like for me, if every single one of my prospects understands the value of a mid-range show, my life is so much easier. When I have a sales call with somebody that has 100 followers on Instagram and they want to be on a show with 1 million listeners, I'm like, okay, How do I explain? You are not ready for that, you know? But if they hear me on a podcast educating that, they come in, they're like, okay, cool. You talked on the podcast about how mid-range shows are when I need to be on. Got it. But when you find yourself on sales calls, re-explaining the same concepts over and over again, those are topics for your one sheet that you can be interviewed about. So then before your sales call, you say, hey, prospect, do me a favor, listen to this interview I did on this podcast. And then I'm also going to do a bunch of research on your business before our call. That way we can come together and like dive right in and make way better use of our time. So have them listen to a podcast interview before the sales call. You'll close a lot more leads. They'll come so much more warmed up. They'll come trusting you so much more as well. Okay. Automated prospecting. Great drip email content. Oh, what's this? I found a
Yeah,
note.
so we've been talking for a long time about, no-show rates, and I'm like, okay, well, you should drip content in between when you schedule the meeting and the meeting itself, and I, created a whole bunch of stuff, gave it to them, but hey, if you got podcast content, then that's even better, right? And especially if you address something that is going to come up in a sales call, right? That you want to
Exactly.
educate about them, so I love that so much.
Yes. And I was saying like to Mike and Marty right before this, we have a new salesperson. They just started yesterday, and yeah, like having podcast content that they can leverage. So if you have a sales team that's doing calls with you, they can leverage your authority by sharing interviews that you've done. Think about all of the topic, like all of the obstacles, like let's face it, if you look at 100 sales calls that you've done, there's going to be some of the same questions that almost every prospect is asking. And so if you're talking about that on podcast, create clips. You do an interview, almost every podcast interview gets uploaded to YouTube, the video portion, and then you can use like Opus clips to create clips from the interview. And then you can have like, hey, here's the clip where I talk about this. Here's the clip where I talk about this, and actually send that to the prospect, because some people will read email. Some people like to watch videos. They're finding you on YouTube. So podcast interviews give you all of this content that you can repurpose and that you can leverage. I'm going to pull up another example in the.
By the way, big fan of Opus Clips. If you guys never have used that before, highly recommend. If you got video content out there, you literally drop in the whole video and it just pulls it all apart and goes, hey, there's this amazing clip. I've done that with some of our masterminds from time to time, throwing it in the Facebook group.
Yeah. It's great. It's great. So I want to pull up an example we have a few clients that target attorneys. And so I thought it'd be helpful if I got some examples. I'm trying to think. Our client, John Robbins, he's not an agency owner. He is a coach to attorneys. So I'll give you some examples from his one sheet, but just, he's not an agency. So law firm business management, how to create marketing that attracts the clients you want and repels the ones you don't. So that really speaks. He knows his target audience. He knows that they want to repel the ones that they don't want to work with. They want to attract the ones they don't. So that shows me that he really understands his target audience's pain points and what they're interested in. How to work in your business less so you can work on your business more. His several proprietary frameworks, including the doctrine of sacrifice versus the doctrine of profit, the 7 main parts of every successful law firm, and the 7 stages of a law firm. So if you have any proprietary frameworks or methodologies or things that you do with your clients, those can turn into interview topics. Perfect. Yeah, we got Opus clips. Yeah, so lots of examples of interview topics and questions. So y'all, what questions do you have? I feel like we could do, okay, Dominique's got her hand raised.
Hello. How are you, Jessica?
Doing great.
Awesome. Thank you for being here today. Quick side note. I actually have been on your email list in 2021. I just
Your name
looked it
looks
up.
so familiar. I was like,
Yes.
you know that name. Love it. Hello.
I probably had a consultation with you guys at some point, but I have been on various podcasts since then, and you've been very your agency has been very helpful for that. So thank you. Um, but my question is, and it's something that I think I'm okay with doing, but I'm just curious to know like your insights or what you would say to do. It's after the podcast is over, and I know we kind of touched on some of it in terms of using it for drip email content, etc. I'm just still brainstorming all the other ways in which I can repurpose that interview internally. A few that I've exercises like creating blog posts, and I have referred it to clients a couple times, and then using it in drip email content like we talked about today. But thank you, Mike, for bringing that up again, because I'm going to be doing it a lot more for 2025. But just curious to know like what other ideas you have or would suggest for after the interview is over, and how to repurpose that again and again and again.
Yes. Okay. So I do have lots of ideas for this. So I'm going to breeze through them. I did a whole, you probably were maybe registered for one of our master classes. We
Yeah,
have a lot
back
of,
in the day.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's how a lot of people end up on our email list is through we have a podcast guesting master class. And so I do a whole bonus session about repurposing the content. And so, I'll drop a link. I'm going to go through a lot of the tips now.
Mhm.
But I do have this contact form if you guys want to like learn about the masterclass or book a call, or I can send you that bonus session replay. Just go through that form and then I'll know that you came from Mike. So a couple things. So a lot of these are very simple too, because I'm all about simplicity. That's why I love podcast guesting, because it's just marketing through relationships and conversation. So post on social media when you schedule I know you're talking about after, but I kind of go
Yeah.
through the whole thing.
Yeah.
So post on social media when you schedule an interview. So this is like the moment you get it secured, do a post. We've had clients that will do that, and then that sparks an invitation to another show. Like, oh, I saw that you're getting booked. Like, I'm looking for podcast interviews. I'd love to have you speak. So just like really talk about the fact that you're getting booked, because it does create buzz. It really positions you as an expert. It positions you as somebody that's like moving and grooving and shaking. So post when you get booked, post the day of your recording, do a little selfie with your microphone, your headphones, like tag the host in all of this, because that kind of helps build that collaboration. And then film yourself being interviewed. So you'll actually do the interview through, Zoom or Riverside or Squadcast. So you have kind of like the recording of you being interviewed, but then you can create another angle and like have a tripod set up where your phone is filming you actually doing the interview. So we have a client that does this, like kind of very high end, like she's a cosmetic dentist in New York City and Beverly Hills. And so she uses podcast interviews for the content. And so I'll just drop a link to a post on her Instagram where you can see. So in that Instagram post that I just put in the chat, you'll see this video where she is, sitting on the couch in her office with her microphone, but she's got her laptop. Like, she's being interviewed on a podcast that we booked for her, but she's filming herself doing it. So it gives that effect that like, it's great for content. It's great for Instagram. So that's an idea for you. Transcribing the interviews, turning them into content. We've had clients literally write books with the content that they get out of the podcast interviews. So those are just a couple. Does that spark any new ideas for you, Dominique?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Especially regarding the transcribing the content, because I am in the process of writing my book. So yeah, like dig back into those interviews and pull out some clips, and I could expound upon it and make it a whole new chapter, or just add it in. The idea that came to mind is referring to that podcast episode in the book. And pulling out a quote or something like just that. So yes, long story short.
Absolutely. I love that. If you're writing a book right now, definitely use podcast appearances to fuel more content, because especially if you get to a point where you're like, hey, like what else do I say? Like as you do interviews, hosts will ask you questions that you never thought to put on your one sheet, but they're curious about it because we forget, like, we're experts in our topic. And sometimes we forget the questions that people have that are not experts in our topic and that aren't where we are. And so when you go on podcasts, people will really genuinely ask you questions that are very beginner level to you, but that's what your target audience needs to hear you speak about. Like, I need to be reminded of that every so often. It's like dumb it down a little bit, like, to you. Like, it's
yeah. That literally happened to me. I just recently did a podcast interview, but this time it was for the short-term rental market, as it relates to their branding, because basically a lot of times they're going into these industries and then they're thinking profit first, but they're not thinking brand first. And so that's why I was invited to be on that podcast, because they wanted to access that knowledge. And some of the questions in my mind, just like behind the scenes kind of thoughts that go through my mind, some of the questions were so uh elementary, if you would, but I was reminded in that moment that to be impactful, it was such a good lesson, because it kind of humbled me for a second. And then anyway, so it humbled me because in my mind, I thought I had to be so advanced, right? In order to be, oh my gosh, this is the greatest content I've ever heard, especially off the heels of getting my master's, where of course they're pushing your brain to the max. And so I'm coming off of that train and I'm like, wait a minute, but my audience is not where my brain is now. And so the questions that they were asking, I'm in my mind, I was like, oh yeah, they really need this part. They need this, the ABCs of this. And it just reminded me, like, even in the ABCs of what we know as experts, all of us on this call, they need our version of the ABC so that it can help them move forward. And I was like, oh yeah, go back to day one, Dominique. So it's interesting that you said that, because that literally happened to me the other day. So thank you for that reminder. Again, I'm being reminded.
I love that. It's so true. This is reminding me, I just listened to an episode of Alex Hormozy's podcast about personal branding and content. And he talked about how, like, I mean, he's such a beast that, like, they do so much testing in their marketing and content strategy. And he realized that his content about business performs so much better when he really, like, speaks about it so simply. Like, if he's saying like LTV and CAC and like all this stuff that, like, a lot of business owners are not super well versed in all of these phrases, but when he really dumbs it down to a very basic level, and I'm not trying to offend anyone to say dumb it down, but you know, like basic.
For sure.
And that's his whole thing. He kind of like talks like a caveman, but it's like, I resonate with it so much. It just makes it easy to understand really, like, complex business stuff. And like, I see that with my business too. I've been in business for 11 years. We've grown to multiple 7 figures. Like, I want to talk about all this stuff, but then my emails that have the highest open rate and the highest click-through rate are me, like, about the most basic topics. And I'm like, go figure, like, that's the one that performs the best, because like your target audience is like 5 steps behind you. Like, that's why they are following you and want to work with you. So yeah.
It makes sense though. The wider audience is going to be at that lower level, and then a more niche audience is further up the chain, right?
Right.
Totally
and
makes
that's
sense.
Like, once you're working with clients, like when my clients actually, they sign up and they're working with us, like, I did a whole marketing funnel audit call, and then I was like getting a lot more advanced and like looking at people's funnels. I'm not going to talk about marketing funnels on my social media and in podcasts, because that's like, you have to actually be implementing podcast guesting and getting traffic to your website for that to even be relevant. So yeah, there's stuff that like we work on with our clients, but marketing to non-clients, you've got to like keep it really, really basic. Like, what's going to get them to just sign up with you, and then you go deep. Then you can make it a little bit more complex, because they're actually implementing what they need to then have the complex conversations.
It's like most of your clientele is probably gonna be the ones that are straining to get results, right?
Yeah, like they need you to then get the initial results, and then once they get those initial results, you take it to the next level. But if you're taking it to the next level in your marketing, you're losing people, because they're like, I can't even do this thing.
Right.
I'm like, do that.
What you don't know there is that Marty just 100% dropped an inside joke very well. That was amazing, Marty. So one of our best
you, thank you.
performing video ads, at least they like to tell me it's one of our best performing video ads. I've yet to see the data from them to support this. Is we put out a little video of a dog pooping, and it said straining to get results.
Oh my God.
And Marty and Ken
And Mike
loved
Mike
it, and I
hated
was
it.
just
Mike
like,
Mike hated it. Mike hated it, but
it.
it got so many views.
Yeah.
Okay.
And everybody's like, they're like, bring the dog back. And I'm like, no.
That's so funny. Yeah, I know. I see stuff like that, and I'm like the shock value. Like there's some ads with real shock value that do really stand out.
It was
That's awesome.
before the terminology scroll stopping. Now I would call it scroll stopping. Like, what's going on with that?
What in the world are you showing?
Any other questions
Okay.
or just like musings from what we've talked about today? Oh, I've not heard of Notebooklum. Well, I do want to, we're kind of like towards the top of the hour. So I did drop a link. It's just it's like a share form link. I don't have a pretty link. But if you fill that just like very short contact form out, you'll get an email with, you can either register for our free masterclass. We have a podcast guesting masterclass where I go through the whole strategy. We have one coming up October 14th through the 16th, and then we have another one in December. And then if you want to book a consultation call and learn about what it looks like to work with us, I'm happy to hop on a call, or just like get our emails like Dominique does and stay in touch. But it's great being here with you all. And if anyone has any final questions, happy to answer. But
Absolutely. Jessica, thank you so much for sharing amazing value with our group. And guys, absolutely, if you're thinking about podcast guesting, then definitely reach out to Jessica. I think you have like an offer of like, hey, we're gonna get you on like 30 podcasts. It's like something like that, right?
yep. So our Amplified Authority program guarantees that you'll be on 30 podcasts. So it's guaranteed. We'll make your one sheet for you. We'll make your media kit, your success blueprint. So it's done for you. We'll get you on the podcast. So if you're like, yeah, I need to get booked, but I don't want to do all the work to pitch and book myself and need some help on the copy of the one sheet, like we're totally full service, done for you. So I'd love to support you if you feel like this would be a good fit for you.
Absolutely. And guys, there's nothing better than building the brand in front of your target market. So there's already familiarity. Having this amazing content to repurpose and drip in front of them. The better and bigger you build the brands, the less number of sales calls you have to have, and just the easier is like, yep, I already know, I like you. Let's do business, right? And so you'll see higher show rates, you'll see higher closing rates, you'll see less, oh hey, let's get back together in 6 months, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm just a really big fan. Anything you can do to build a brand in front of your target market, I think this is a very beautiful way. Which, by the way, when we talk about the demographics of a podcast listener, right? This is someone that's really invested in themselves and growing, right? In a lot of cases, and so they also tend to have greater finances and all sorts of that stuff to actually make the investment. So, anyways,
Yeah.
big fan.
Got a question real quick. Can you mind if I ask a question?
Go for
Go
it.
for it.
So do you have a line on any like religious podcasts? Is that a thing?
That's a great question. So it depends on like what type of religious podcast, like just straight up religion. It's not an industry that we have a ton of connections with. Like some clients are
Gotcha.
faith-based, like so they want to be on business podcasts, but there's some faith-based business podcasts. So if
Yeah.
you're
Do you
not
know
sure,
what you know what you call a monk with a podcast?
Oh my.
An air fryer.
Oh my.
And out.
Dropping the
in.
jokes.
so in the chat, I just put a link to an episode of our podcast where I interviewed an SEO agency owner and how he got a $60,000 agency client from podcast guesting. So if you want to hear like a real case study example, I asked him about like, his topics, his questions, how he, what his call to action was. So we do create a lot of case study content, like because I'm all about not just saying this is one size fits all, but like what's actually working for real clients. And so I would encourage you to listen to that if you're like, I want more.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Guys, we'll be working on getting this whole session up on YouTube in the next couple of weeks. Also, make sure that I shared some of the links in the description of that, as well as in the Facebook group. Thank you so much for everybody that attended and asked questions and participated. And Jessica, thank you so much for just, again, sharing amazing value with our group.
Awesome. Thanks so much for
Thank you,
having me.
Jessica.
And it was nice to speak with you all.